We are turning our attention today to a case that has really haunted Quebec for decades.
A deeply unsettling story.
It is. It's a story about a child's sudden disappearance, a search that was just massive, and then a forensic investigation that, well, it left everyone with more questions than answers.
Agonizing ambiguity is the right word for it.
So, our sources for this analysis focus on the tragic 1978 disappearance and death of 10-year-old Manon Dubé in Sherbrooke. We've compiled a lot of material here, articles, research, that really outlines the known facts.
And also the challenges the police face at the time, which were substantial.
Exactly. And the later theories, which are powerful, connecting her case to what might have been a much wider pattern of unsolved crimes in the eastern townships. So what we want to do here is really break down this fragmented evidence. We're here to extract the raw data, the facts, the timeline, the conflicting findings, just to understand why this case has remained in, a kind of legal limbo for so long.
And we should say, we are approaching this with a great deal of sensitivity, focusing only on the verifiable details from the source material.
Right. We're trying to find clarity in a story that's really defined by its lack of resolution.
So to properly frame this, we need to establish the anchors, the time, and the place. Manon Dubé was born around 1967, and she lived in Sherbrooke, Quebec. Her disappearance happened on January 27, 1978.
In the middle of a very harsh Canadian winter.
A very harsh winter. And the discovery of what happened was delayed. Her body wasn't found for 2 months, not until March 24, 1978.
And it was found in a location that was significantly distant from her home.
Yes, and that geographical shift, that distance, it complicated the investigation right from the start.
And the most central, just agonizing fact of this whole case is the forensic outcome. Even after her body was found, the official cause of death remains legally undetermined.
That's right. The records list possible drowning or exposure.
Which feels so inadequate.
Exactly. That legal ambiguity is the crux of it all. But, and it's vital we state this up front, subsequent analysis, particularly from reports cited by the National Post, suggests there is compelling evidence that points very strongly toward murder.
So we have this tension, a huge tension.
A critical one. You have the official, inconclusive legal ruling set against this powerful body of circumstantial evidence and later expert analysis that argues for a deliberate homicide. And that tension is precisely why this case is still so significant.
Okay, let's unpack the moments leading up to the disappearance itself. It happened on a residential street in the evening, which makes it feel even more visceral. We're starting on the afternoon of January 27, 1978 in Sherbrooke.
It was a typical Friday afternoon in winter. Manon, who was 10 years old, was out sledding. She wasn't alone. She was with a group of friends and her younger sister, Chantal, who was 7.
And they were just enjoying the last bits of daylight.
Right, on some hills only 3 blocks from their family apartment on Bienville Street. This is their backyard, basically, their known safe territory.
And the time of day is so crucial here. We're talking about 7:30 p.m. in the middle of winter, so it's completely dark.
It is. Darkness has fully descended. So the kids decide, it's time to pack it up and head that very short distance home.
And the sequence of events during that walk, it's just a few hundred feet, but it's where everything went wrong.
It's meticulously documented. They're about 1 block away from their apartment. And Chantal, she's 7, she's cold, she just wants to get inside, so she makes the decision to run ahead.
She separates from Manon right there at the street corner.
That street corner. That is the precise moment. The records mark that split second as the final confirmed sighting of Manon Dubé alive.
She was within sight of her home, and she never made it.
The fact that they were separated by just a matter of seconds, only because of the cold, it just underscores how quickly an opportunity can be seized by a predator.
When Manon didn't arrive, her mother, Jeanine Dubé, she knew something was wrong immediately, didn't she?
Instantly. She reported her daughter missing right away. She didn't wait the usual period. You can only imagine the terrifying certainty she must have felt that something was profoundly wrong.
And for anyone trying to picture this scene, the description of our clothes, that's the last solid piece of information they had for 2 months.
It is. And these details, they really connect us to the humanity of the tragedy. Manon was wearing a navy blue snowsuit, a salmon-colored scarf, a toque.
Which is a classic knitted winter hat in Quebec.
Right. And red mittens and snow boots. That navy and salmon color with the bright red mittens, those are the images that the police bulletin broadcast across the entire region.
But the truly alarming part of this, the part that adds so much weight to the suspicion of abduction, is that this didn't happen in a vacuum.
No, it didn't. There were significant warning signs beforehand. The community was already under threat.
What kind of warning signs are we talking about?
The presence of a known threat is a huge factor here. During police interviews, right after Manon vanished, her little sister Chantal gave them a very specific, very disturbing detail.
From a 7-year-old.
From a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
She said that she and her cousin had been followed by someone in a dark Buick just the week before.
Wow. That suggests an active surveillance pattern. It's not random. It suggests the predator was already focused on that area, maybe even selecting potential victims.
And the threat wasn't limited to just the Dubé family. When officers started canvassing the neighborhood, the source material showed that multiple neighbors confirmed a really disturbing trend.
Let me guess, their children had also been approached.
Yes. Their children had also been approached by strangers in suspicious circumstances in the months leading up to Manon's disappearance.
So this establishes a pattern of predatory behavior that was already a known issue right there around Bienville Street. It makes you wonder how widespread this knowledge was. Did the authorities know the full scope of the risk before January 27th?
That is the critical question. The danger wasn't a sudden, unforeseen event. It was a documented, ongoing struggle for that community.
And the fact that the mother reported her missing instantly and the police response was so large and immediate?
It suggests they were operating in an environment where the threat of stranger danger was acutely felt and understood, both by the residents and by law enforcement.
Okay, so given that atmosphere of threat, let's look at the scale of the search effort that launched that very same night. It sounds like police knew the clock was ticking.
The swiftness and the scope of the response were. They were a testament to how severe they knew this was.
Yeah.
Almost instantly, on the night of the 27th, police published a public bulletin with Manon's name and photo.
Trying to get help from the public right away.
Which, as we'll see, had some severe unintended consequences.
In terms of just manpower, this was a massive undertaking for a local police force.
It was. A large search party was organized right away. It included 16 officers and 2 specialized tracker dogs.
And where did they focus first?
Their initial deployment was specifically on the nearby woods. This suggests that the first hypothesis, maybe the most hopeful one, was that she had just wandered off, maybe fallen or gotten trapped in the cold.
So they were treating it partly as a missing person in distress case?
At least partially, yes. But they also tackled the possibility of something more sinister at the same time.
Right, because of those reports of suspicious activity.
Yes, so there was a critical division of labor. A separate, sizable team of 13 officers immediately began conducting thorough house-to-house investigations along Rue Bienville and the adjoining streets.
So they were looking for witnesses, any sign that she had been taken into a nearby house.
Exactly. And beyond the official police manpower, the community mobilized as well.
The civilian involvement really highlights that sense of crisis.
Absolutely. Snowmobile volunteers, who are often the best way to cover large, snow-covered areas quickly, they joined the effort. They were tasked with combing the wider area, especially between Sherbrooke and Steely-Dorford.
So this wasn't just a grid search of the neighborhood. This was a huge deployment covering residential areas, wilderness, the roads.
Right. It reflected the fear that she could have been transported anywhere.
And even with this massive, immediate mobilization, we're talking nearly 30 officers, specialist dogs, countless volunteers, the effort yielded nothing in the immediate area.
Nothing. It suggests that if she was abducted, the evidence they needed was gone from that search radius within minutes of 7:30 p.m.
The lack of any immediate evidence from such a concentrated search, it just speaks to the devastating efficiency of the perpetrator if we assume it was a homicide.
The time window was incredibly small. And then, as the days wore on, the tragedy was just worsened immeasurably by a cruel act of manipulation.
The ransom hoax. This was a profound psychological attack on the family.
It was. Less than 48 hours after Manon went missing, Jenny Dubé started getting these phone calls from unknown people.
And the cruelty was deliberate. It was specific.
It was. One caller in particular claimed he had Manon and demanded a ransom of $25,000 for her safe return. This wasn't a vague threat. It was calculated malice.
And what makes it so calculated is the heartbreaking context around that specific number, $25,000.
Right. The source materials reveal that Jeanine Dubé was a new widow. Her husband had recently passed away, and she had just received about $20,000 from his life insurance policy.
That detail just changes everything.
It does. If the caller had demanded, say, $1 million, the police might have just dismissed it as ridiculous. But asking for $25,000, which was right in the ballpark of the insurance payout, it strongly implies that the perpetrator, or at least the hoaxer, knew about the family's intimate recent financial situation.
So we have a caller with targeted knowledge making a specific, believable demand. This suggests a level of surveillance or proximity that is far beyond some random opportunist. So why did the police dismiss it as a hoax so quickly?
This is a critical point about investigative judgment under extreme pressure. The police conclusion was rooted in a practical but immediate security failure.
Which was?
The Dubé family's home telephone number had been broadcast on a local radio station as part of those initial public bulletins asking for tips.
So the very tool they used to try and find her was turned against the family.
Precisely. The police theorized that someone who heard the number publicly shared had just decided to call. They publicly announced the call was likely a sick joke.
An attempt to manage public anxiety, maybe.
Perhaps. And to divert resources away from a futile ransom negotiation. But the fact that the caller referenced a sum so close to the insurance payout, that remains highly suspicious. It really complicates the random sick joke theory.
To target a grieving mother with that kind of financial precision, it's a level of malice that's just shocking.
The emotional betrayal of that hoax was maybe as damaging as the disappearance itself. To have that brief, false flash of hope that Manon was alive and could be brought back, only to have it snatched away, it just compounded the family's suffering.
We have a quote from Manon Dubé that captures the agony of that 2-month waiting period. She said, "I can't help but think she has been abducted, attacked, or raped. I pray to God this hasn't happened."
That expression of fear is profound. It shows the transition from that frantic search of the first night to the deep, paralyzing fear that her daughter was suffering. The hoax, coming so early, really set the tone for the whole investigation.
An investigation where hope was just repeatedly crushed.
Forcing the family to confront the darkest possibilities.
That agonizing 2-month wait finally came to an end on March 24th, 1978. Let's shift now to the discovery and the critical initial forensic findings.
The discovery happened on Good Friday. Manon's body was found on an isolated road near Ayers Cliff, Massawippi. The location is fundamental here. It was about 19 miles away from her home in Sherbrooke.
A considerable distance.
A very considerable distance. And it confirmed the worst suspicion, that Manon had been forcibly removed from her neighborhood and transported somewhere else.
And the people who found her, that also highlights how remote the site was.
Yes. Her body was discovered by 2 teenagers from Montreal who just happened to be in the area. This was not a location that was heavily monitored or frequently visited, which suggests the perpetrator intentionally sought out an isolated place to leave her.
Can you describe the condition in which she was found?
She was found face down and partially frozen in a stream. The presence of water and freezing temperatures. That immediately introduces massive complications for any kind of forensic analysis.
So the location itself, a cold, watery environment, it starts to obscure the evidence right away.
It does. It begins to erase the evidence needed for a clear cause of death determination.
What about her clothing? The items from the bulletin?
Largely, yes, it was intact. She still wore the navy snowsuit and other winter clothes, which was instrumental in identifying her. But the anomalies were crucial.
What kind of anomaly?
One of her red mittens was missing, and her toque, her winter hat, wasn't on her body but was eventually recovered nearby.
A missing mitten, a recovered hat. These small details are highly significant in a crime scene analysis, aren't they?
They absolutely are. They hint at a violent disruption. A missing mitten could mean she lost it in a struggle or during transport. A recovered toque suggests it might have been pulled off or knocked loose at the location where her body was deposited.
These are tiny pieces of physical evidence that suggest movement, struggle, or some kind of external interference.
Exactly.
And what were the immediate physical injuries noted by police at the site?
Manon had suffered broken bones, and there was a noticeable gash on her forehead. At the time, the police on scene immediately speculated that the gash might have been caused by jagged ice.
Consistent with being found in a frozen stream, they tried to explain the injuries through the environment.
They did. And their initial assessment of the timeline of how long she had been there?
What was it?
Given the condition of the body and the environment, They initially estimated that her body had most likely been at that location for the majority of the 2 months she was missing.
The implication being that she was taken, transported, and died very shortly after her abduction, and the cold just preserved her body.
Correct. Which moves us into the post-mortem analysis. This is the critical phase where physical evidence runs headlong into forensic uncertainty.
And that ambiguity is what ultimately defined the legal status of this case for decades.
The autopsy was performed in Montreal, and despite the efforts of the forensic team, the precise cause of death remains officially undetermined. The final report was inconclusive, listing possible drowning or exposure as the likely scenarios.
And that's the core tragedy of the investigative failure here. The official status is undetermined cause, but later sources, like the National Post, say there's compelling evidence of murder. So why did the initial autopsy fail to secure a homicide ruling?
It creates a tremendous legal hurdle. When a body is recovered after 2 months in freezing water and snow, the environmental degradation is immense. Forensic teams struggled to distinguish trauma-inflicted ante-mortem before death from post-mortem damage.
Damage caused by freezing water animals.
Exactly. The freezing in the water essentially erased the subtle, critical forensic markers needed to prove a deliberate illegal act caused the death.
If there had been defensive wounds or a clear fatal blow, the ruling would have been easier.
Precisely. But in cold water immersion cases, signs of a struggle or even asphyxiation can be masked by environmental factors. The result is this challenging legal status of undetermined, which effectively prevented the case from being actively prosecuted as a murder for decades.
But the sources do indicate conflicting possibilities about the specific trauma. Let's go back to that gash on her head that police first thought was from ice.
That initial speculation was based on what was apparent at the scene.
Oh.
But later forensic analysis raised serious questions. Suggestions arose that the gash might not have been caused by rough natural ice at all.
But by what?
But perhaps by something metal, a blunt force instrument. This shift immediately changes the scenario from an accidental slip or environmental trauma to a deliberate, violent act.
A metal object
Mm-hmm.
that would strengthen the homicide argument substantially. But the uncertainty didn't end there, did it? The timeline itself was also questioned.
Absolutely. The question of whether her body was moved is a major point of conflict. The initial police estimate was that she'd been in that stream for the full 2 months.
But if she was moved, the discovery scene isn't the death scene, meaning investigators were focusing on the wrong location.
That's the implication. Some investigators considered that her body may have been placed in the stream later, and some forensic findings suggested that, based on decomposition or other markers, she may have been at that location for significantly less than 2 months.
Which contradicts the initial police estimate.
It does, and it opens up this terrifying black hole in the timeline. If she didn't die immediately on January 27th, where was she for those weeks? Was she held captive?
These conflicting possibilities just illustrate the depth of the initial investigative challenge. You have a scene suggesting drowning or exposure, but an injury that might be from a metal object, and a timeline that refuses to be fixed.
And we also have to address the speculative narratives that attach themselves to cases like this. The sources note that suggestions of a hit-and-run or sexual abuse were raised.
But it's important to clarify what the source material actually supports here.
We have to be very clear. While these scenarios were raised, the source material explicitly states that no evidence indicates either of these. We have to stick to the documented facts. The core ambiguity remains centered on the mechanism of death.
So because of all this forensic inconclusiveness, the case inevitably stalled.
It became cold relatively quickly. No clear suspect, no clear cause of death, and a compromised crime scene. It remained dormant and unsolved for over 2 decades.
A devastating reflection of how environment and time can just degrade the evidence you need for a prosecution.
It is. But the family refused to let the case just vanish. Manon's sister, Chantal, she pushed for action years later.
What happened then?
In 2001, 23 years after Manon vanished, her sister requested that the case be reopened. This was a critical step. It allowed investigators to use new forensic technologies that didn't exist in 1978.
Hoping to extract DNA maybe, or reassess old evidence?
That was the hope.
Yeah.
A tremendous, though fragile, sense of hope for the family.
Right.
But unfortunately, the devastating cycle repeated itself. The results of the renewed investigation proved inconclusive. Even with modern technology, the original forensic ambiguity, compounded by the time that had passed, it just persisted. The case went cold once again.
And this unresolved status brings us to what makes this case so crucial for criminal research. the effort to move beyond the forensics by connecting her tragedy to a wider pattern of violence.
This shift in focus is monumental, from Manon as an isolated victim to one data point in a potential series. Over time, investigators and analysts recognized distinct links between Manon Dubé's case and the deaths of two other young women in the same region, Teresa Allure and Louise Cameron.
What were the shared resemblances that allowed them to make that connection? We're talking about three separate incidents.
The resemblance is centered on several factors: the age and demographic of the victims, the proximity of the crimes within the eastern townships, the lack of resolution, and crucially, the discovery sites.
The patterns of removal and disposal?
Exactly. It suggested a methodical, repeatable behavior.
So the hypothesis becomes terrifyingly clear that these three deaths may have been committed by the same person, the presence of a serial perpetrator operating in the region in the late 1970s.
And if that's true, it changes the entire investigative approach. Manon's case is no longer an isolated mystery. It's a critical piece of a much larger systemic puzzle. And to validate this theory, the investigation brought in some highly specialized expertise.
They brought in Kim Rossmo. So for our listener, can you explain what a geographic profiler like Rossmo actually does?
Kim Rossmo is a leading authority in geographic profiling. It's a technique that analyzes the spatial behavior of criminals, especially serial offenders. It doesn't rely on DNA or eyewitness testimony. It relies on mapping the locations.
The victim's last known sighting, the crime scene, the body disposal sites.
All of it. To create a mathematical probability surface that indicates where the offender most likely lives or operates.
It's essentially using geography as evidence itself. So what did Rossmo's assessment of these three cases, Dubé, Allure, and Cameron, reveal?
Based on the spatial patterns, the clustering, and the geography of it all, Rossmo strongly suggested that a serial killer was operating in the area during the late 1970s.
Wow. That analytical conclusion essentially bypasses the frustrating undetermined cause status of Manon's autopsy.
It does. Analytically, it places Manon's death firmly in the category of a homicide committed by a repeat offender, regardless of what the initial forensic report was able to prove.
It's a powerful conclusion.
It absolutely is. And this finding explains why the Manon Dubé case remains a touchstone in criminal history research. It's not just listed under unsolved murders in Canada, it's specifically referenced in works analyzing criminal investigative failures.
Let's talk about that phrase, criminal investigative failures. How does Manon's case exemplify a systemic failure, especially when the initial search was so massive?
The failure wasn't in the immediate search effort. That was huge. The failure was in the inability to recognize the pattern early. Because Manon's cause of death was inconclusive, and because the other cases were geographically separate, they were treated as distinct, isolated incidents for decades.
I see. So this technical forensic failure, the inability to get a homicide ruling, meant the case wasn't assigned to, say, a specialized homicide task force that might have been tracking linked cases.
Exactly. Had that connection been made in 1978, the resources and the focus would have been fundamentally different. It could have potentially prevented later victims, or at least sped up the investigation into a single perpetrator. Rossmo's work, decades later, illuminated that initial catastrophic blind spot.
It really underscores the immense value of geographic profiling. Even if the evidence at one scene is fragmented, the meta-level evidence, the pattern signature, can provide the context you need to move forward.
Even decades late. It provides the families of Manon, Teresa, and Louise with a framework for understanding the violence that the initial forensic report simply could not. It shifts the burden of proof. It asks us to look not just at the injury, but at the movement and the consistency of the perpetrator's operational area.
Okay, let's review the complex trajectory we've explored here. It all began with a definitive disappearance in Sherbrooke. A short walk home from a sledding hill on January 27, 1978, ended with Manon vanishing near a street corner. This was followed by that massive but ultimately fruitless search effort, which was then immediately compounded by that cruel, calculated ransom hoax.
A hoax that preyed on her newly widowed mother by referencing her insurance payout.
Then the somber discovery 2 months later, 19 miles away, which just raised this immense number of forensic questions. The body's condition, face down, partially frozen, with broken bones and that questionable gash on the head.
All leading directly to the painful, inconclusive official status of drowning or exposure.
So what's most critical for the listener to carry forward is this enduring analytical conflict. Legally, the status is undetermined cause.
Right. But when you integrate everything else, the early warnings in the neighborhood, The compelling evidence of murder cited in later reports, and that firm geographic link established by Kim Rossmo, the analytical weight points overwhelmingly toward a systemic homicide.
The confirmation of a potential serial pattern suggests Manon was a victim of a pervasive danger present in Quebec at that time.
Linking her fate to at least two other unsolved tragedies, her case remains a profound example of how pattern recognition can ultimately provide the context that fragmented, environmentally compromised forensic evidence simply cannot.
The discussion of this case really forces us to reckon with the limits of relying purely on physical evidence when time and the elements intervene. The whole investigation rested on these fragmented clues.
From a single missing red mitten to the ambiguous nature of a head wound.
And finally, to the geographical pattern of a killer's potential movements.
Which raises an important final thought for anyone studying these cases. In investigations where the initial forensic results are inconclusive, compromised, or just inadequate for a homicide ruling, how pivotal is the role of pattern recognition, like the kind used by a geographic profiler?
Is the pattern, the signature of the crime across multiple jurisdictions, a stronger, more enduring piece of evidence than the individual scene's forensic report?
It's certainly the piece that ultimately gives cases like Manon Dubé's their lasting historical importance in the fight for justice.
Thank you for engaging with this difficult and sensitive material as we analyze the sources surrounding the case of Manon Dubé.
It is essential that we continue to remember cases like Manon Dubé's, as unsolved cold cases always represent unresolved injustice for the victims and their families.
Thanks for listening.